Get ready to embark on an economic journey as we unveil the heartbeats of the Rwandan business landscape. This is the Business Age, your front row seat to the economic renaissance of the land of 1,000 hills. Join us as we traverse the bustling markets of Kigali, delve into the success stories of Rwandan entrepreneurs, and explore the dynamic forces shaping the nation's economy. From the boardrooms to the street vendors, we'll bring you the voices of the visionaries and the minds behind Rwanda's economic evolution. Discover the fusion of tradition and technology, witness the agricultural innovations transforming rural communities, and explore the cutting-edge innovations propelling Rwanda into a new era of economic prosperity. From the city lights to the rural landscapes, every business is a story waiting to be told. Hello there. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of The Business Age. Now, the National Bank of Rwanda announced that it reduced the central bank repo rate from 7% to 6.5%. How does this impact the consumer? How does this impact the private sector? On today's episode, we are going to have a conversation with the Chief Economist, Dr. Thierry Kadisa, who's going to expound more on that. You'll be with me, Naringwa Fiona Mothoni. Thank you for making time to speak to us today. Let's start by unpacking the current economic conditions. What influenced the recent MPC decision and what was the MPC outcome?
The key outcome of the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee decision that took place last week, is basically a reduction in the central bank rate. So the MPC decides on what we call the monetary policy stance. So what's the rate at which the benchmark rate, what's the rate at which the central bank is lending to banks. This rate used to be 7%, and now it's reduced to 6.5%. To give a bit of background to it, you know that for the past 2 years or so, we had very high inflation. So as a response to that, and to try to reduce this level of inflation to acceptable or desired levels, what we think about the bond between 2 and 8%, central bank decided to increase the rate. So it increased gradually from 4.5 all the way to the maximum of 7.5. And then in May this year, the MPC of the central bank decided to reduce it to 7. And now, this month, so last week, it was reduced further to 6.5. The reason behind that is simply that now, after a period of very high inflation, inflation is stable. That's the main reason. So inflation is stable. We've had inflation since the beginning of the year. It was varying around 5%. Actually, the second quarter of the year was 5.1% on average. And July numbers, which is the latest, is 4.9%. So you see that as much as we want inflation to be between 2 and 8%, the ideal level is 5%. And we are very, very close to that level. That's number one. Number two is, and we can develop on that, but the projections of inflation. What we see inflation, how we see inflation from now to the end of the year, and even next year. We are seeing that inflation is going to remain at around the same 5%. So if inflation is stable at the desired level, and expect it to remain at the same level, then basically that's the reason why the MPC decided to further reduce the rates to continue, normalizing this monetary policy stance and helping to continue boosting the economy.
As you've said, since the COVID-19 pandemic period, this is the second time that we've seen the repo rate being reduced. So when you're looking at the economy at large, how is this going to reflect?
Yes, so basically, yes, the economy since COVID has been recovering fast. Actually, we had very good numbers in terms of economic growth. The past 2 years, 8.2%, 2022, 2023. And the first quarter of this year, 9.7%. What we are seeing now is that actually even the second quarter will be very high. and even the third quarter. So this year, 2024, is likely to have high GDP growth too. So actually, the problem we have been having was not growth. The problem was inflation, right? And inflation is a very serious problem, because if inflation is high for a long period of time, it can affect prediction, it can affect decisions to invest in the medium term or decision to consume, etc. So if inflation had stayed at the same highest level for for longer, I believe it would have consequences on economic growth we are seeing. So basically, the fact that inflation is stabilizing is a good sign. It means that this high growth can be at least sustainable. And that's what we are trying to do. So,
yeah. How does the MPC balance between stimulating economic growth on one hand and controlling inflation on the other?
Actually, yes. So what the MPC does, and the mandate of the central bank, as you know, is price stability and financial sector stability. So the central bank objective is to put the conditions in place so that this macroeconomic stability is there, because that's, I think, one of the first, or let's say the number one condition to keep growing our economy, to keep having this development. So if you want investors, both in Rwanda or outside Rwanda, to come and invest in the country, they need to see stability in the macroeconomics in general, macroeconomic situation in general. And that number one of the main indicators is inflation. So the role of the MPC is to do everything possible to keep inflation low and stable. And that will be a signal then to continue growing our economy. So I don't see, it's true that there's a balancing act. You know, in economics we say high GDP could lead to high inflation, then therefore central bank might raise rates that could negatively affect GDP temporarily and contribute to lower inflation. All that is true, but that's in the short term, in the business cycle. But if you look at it from a longer term perspective, you cannot afford high inflation for a long period of time, because even the high GDP that you're seeing is not going to be sustainable. So if you look at it from a longer point of view, longer term point of view, the two are not contradictory. So you need to take measures, and that's the role of the central bank and the MPC, to maintain inflation low and stable, even if that could be temporarily painful, so that you achieve longer term growth. So I think that's the main objective, and that's how we see that. So we've been raising the rates, it's true, for the past 2 years. I mean, the central bank has been raising the rates, but that was to address the inflation issue. Now that the inflation is quite stable, now we can reduce the rate and keep supporting the growth. It's a cycle, it's always like that.
Now, looking at the currency in itself, also 2 years we've seen not only our local currency, but also most currencies within Africa have depreciated. And comparing the currency depreciation this year to last year, this year we'd say we're around 4.9% year to date, comparing to last year. Just do speak to us as how we've seen the currency trends over the years and where we are today.
It's very important what you are saying here, because sometimes we see what is happening here, but we don't see what is happening elsewhere. All currencies have been depreciating against the USD since 2022. The first reason is because of this high inflation that was also in the US, by the way. You can see Americans are complaining about cost of living, etc. That's one of the main topics of the presidential election in the US now. Because high inflation, inflation was so high, I don't think it was ever seen at that level since the 1930s or so. Then that the central bank in the US, Fed, had to increase the rate very dramatically. And that has made the US dollar stronger against any other currency. So in Africa, in developing economies in general, all our local currencies have been depreciating fast against the USD. That's an external factor. Another factor that is affecting our local currency is our capacity to generate more inflows of foreign exchange compared to the outflows. So I'm going to talk here about the trade deficit in goods. So we're importing more than we export. Therefore, the demand for forex can be sometimes higher or put pressure because the supply of the forex is not enough to compensate. This is what we've seen last year. So last year, you're right, it was very high. Actually, it was one of the highest we've seen. We had 18% depreciation of the franc rwandais against the US dollar by the end of 2023. But what we are seeing now is that the trend is much slower. I mean, the depreciation is much slower than last year. So we can say that it is kind of normalizing because we are close to 5%, as you're saying. I think as of today, probably around a bit more than 5.5%, around 5.4 to 5.5%. This is the depreciation compared to December. You can see that at this trend, we are going to have depreciation at the end of this year that most likely could be in single digits, which as opposed to 18% last year. Again, it's a bit higher than the historical average. In Rwanda, usually we have a depreciation around 4.5%. That's a normal depreciation. So as we are moving from a very high depreciation, we are still a bit higher than usual, but you see that it is normalizing. The trend is normalizing. That's the case for some other economies, but not all. Some countries are very much struggling with the depreciation and inflows of dollars. So that trend will also be affected the other way around when the Fed, the central bank of the US, will start reducing their rate. And this will happen soon. As they are seeing their inflation also coming back to their targets, they will start reducing their rates, which would be also good news for developing economies like us, meaning that the dollar would be less expensive.
How do we see our currency comparing within the region?
Yes, our trend within the region, maybe to explain that a bit, because we are not yet integrated, unfortunately, in Africa, in a way that we can exchange goods and services in our direct currencies. We are always going to refer to the dollar, right? So our trend, I mean, the depreciation we have vis-a-vis Kenyan shilling, Ugandan shilling, etc., would be basically relative to their own depreciation vis-a-vis the dollar. So it's difficult to say that, yes, the numbers are there. You can see even, you can see one franc equal how many Ugandan shilling, but in reality it will be reflecting more the dynamics of their own economies, their own trade deficit, their own exchanges with the rest of the world, so their own depreciation vis-a-vis the dollar, than the direct exchange with Rwanda. But I would say that there's no unusual trend. Actually, what we can say this year, depreciation of the Rwandan franc vis-a-vis all other currencies, put the euro, the dollar, and the regional currency, is much lower in general than last year.
Current inflation outlook, how does it impact the policy stance?
So inflation, the latest number, July, is 4.9%. It means that we have prices increase between July this year and July last year at 4.9%. If you look at the breakdown of this, we still see fresh foods and food inflation very low. And this is because of two things. You have lower prices of what international food prices. So for example, you know that we are importing sugar, we're importing rice, cooking oil and things like that. Compared to last year, all these items on the international markets, prices have been declining. So that's one reason why we are also seeing on the market here either stability or at least lower compared to last year. Then another reason that's very important is availability of fresh food on the local market. So one driver of high inflation last year was weather or climate change that had affected agricultural production. This is not the case this year. Since December, we've had a very good harvest of what we call season A of fresh food products. This is why you can see stability in most of the fresh food items as we speak now. So food inflation is really low. Transport inflation has increased a bit. Energy inflation, let's say, is quite stable. So that's what we are seeing for the moment.
Okay, and now when you look at repo rate has been reduced, we've seen inflation is also within the central bank rate bandwidth, but then the currency is also depreciating, that currency depreciation is also relatively low compared to last year. How is all this going to impact the different sectors, or what particular sectors are going to benefit the most, if we may say?
I think all of them. Why? Because if you have a good condition, you have good condition in terms of agriculture production. So first of all, agriculture sector. The first half of the year, we've seen significant growth in the agriculture sector. Food crops production, if I remember well, was more than 8%, which is a very good growth. And industry and services sector, some of them are in double-digit growth. And in the industry sector, we see very good performance of the construction sector. You see a lot of construction activities are happening in town, either private or government projects. So that is good in terms of the companies that are involved in the business, giving construction services, but also people employed in the construction sector. We also have in the services sector, which has been growing by more than 10%, we have a trade sector, a wholesale trade. Actually, there are even ripple effects. You know, when you have good agriculture production, then it goes into the food processing. It goes into big companies that are making beverages. So all these companies are also benefiting in a way. So you have wholesale trade and the traders who are actually buying this stuff and selling on the market. Wholesale trade, ICT services, financial services, all these are the good performers this year. But there are many others. So I would say that whenever you have you have good conditions, like you were saying, inflation low and stable. You have the central bank signaling by reducing the rate. You have good conditions on the agriculture side. Actually, all these are signs that the economy is booming and business people, consumers, it should be a sign also for them to say, okay, it is time to invest, it is time to start my business, it is time to grow my business, etc. So I think that's what we are going to see now. More.
Okay, now just looking at the financial stability, you've touched on the financial sector being one of the good performing sectors within the country. Then just give us the current outlook.
Yes, so as you know, we have two committees. We have the Monetary Policy Committee and the Financial Stability Committee, and usually we put together the results of the two when we communicate. On the side of financial stability, we see that the financial system that we have here, from banks, microfinance, insurance, and others, is overall is sound and stable. So we have different metrics that we look at in terms of the liquidity, the capital, and the non-performing loans. They are all within the range that we are giving in terms of, if it exceeds or is lower than that, then it will be problematic. So right now we don't see any challenge on the side of financial stability. Actually, when we talk about investment on the economic side, we're also seeing a good trend of borrowing. So people going to look for loans, what we call new authorized loans, been growing very fast, exceeding 20%, I believe. So if in a situation where you have increasing trend in new loans, and at the same time very stable NPL, non-performing loans, that's a good sign of stability. It means that we get businesses getting more loans, and they're able to repay their loans, and the banks are making profits. So that's what basically we are looking at.
Within the report, looking at the non-performing loans, they are still within the 5% benchmark rate of the central bank. But how will the recent decision impact the lending, the ability to lend to not only the private sector, but to consumers as well?
Actually, even in periods where the central bank rate was high, we saw still continuous growth in the credit. But what we expect to see is that this growth continuing. For example, since the beginning of the year, it was 20% plus new loans, 20% plus credit to the private sector. These are metrics that we continue following up on. And we believe the trend is continuing. Every month we see new loans, outstanding credit increasing. So of course there's a sign when the central bank rate is signaling and reducing the rates, conditions are in a way, it's cheaper for banks to get financing either from the central bank or from each other in the interbank markets. It should be also reducing the cost of banks, because the deposit rates should follow, so term deposits, and therefore conditions should be there at least for better conditions on the market means lower interest rate in general. It's true that in reality it's not exactly 100% like this, and it takes time, it has a delay, but with adjustment then the conditions should allow this continuous trend. So yes, so what we are seeing is definitely a continuous trend in growth of credits to the private sector especially.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the interbank rates, how is it currently? Do we also kind of expect it to also reduce?
Oh yes, we do expect it to reduce. Actually, it has already reduced. What we can see, the interbank rate is very, very direct. This morning we had a meeting where we're showing that the interbank rate, if I recall well, the last couple of days was around 6.8%, coming from more than 7%. I mean, it was 7.4 the month before. So you see that the decision of last week is already being reflected from central bank rate from 7 to 6.5, then you see interbank rate from 7.3, 7.4 to 6.8 already. So we have a band. We actually monitoring the interbank rate, which has to be maintained within a bound of central bank rate plus 1% and central bank rate minus 1%. And you can see it's always within this band. So for the moment, the interbank rate is already reflected. Now, what we are going to see in the next few weeks is that probably the T-bills rates, government treasury bills, is also going to start reducing. And the shorter maturity rates all are going to start reducing. Then later on, deposit rates, and after a lag again, we hope to see something on the lending rate, but that's a bit more sticky than the rest.
At the financial stability, after the assessment, what were the outcomes? What are some of the risks that are still being monitored, as well as uncertainties?
It's good that you talk about the risks, because some of the risks are both on the economic side and also financial stability side. Other matches don't work exactly the same way. For us, we identify one risk, which is what's happening globally in terms of geopolitical tensions. You have wars happening in the Middle East, in Ukraine and Russia, and that is creating frictions. And you remember that at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, there's been also some signs of financial instability in some of the developed economies. It didn't happen here. But what we are looking at is monitoring if this risk materialized there, would there be any risk that there would be contagion to the region and then to Rwanda? For the moment, we are not seeing that, but that's something that we keep monitoring. Also on the economic side, the same. We are not seeing significant impacts on commodity prices. But if something unusual happens, then oil prices are a bit tricky to predict. So we are monitoring, saying international oil prices, are they going to be affected? For the moment, we are not seeing that, but it's a risk. So both on the economic side and the financial stability side, it's being looked on. But for the moment, there's nothing there's really no issue that we are seeing.
3 banks transitioned into the microfinance, and this was mainly induced by the Central Bank of Rwanda due to the policies that were put in place. How does this impact the sector overall, and what does this really even imply?
Oh, that simply means that, so first of all, this is the result of looking at the regulations that are in place for banks. There are some requirements for banks that are different for microfinance. So when these requirements have been put in place, these 3 microfinance, which used to be banks, decided to belong to the category, to move from the category of banks to microfinance for their own reasons, saying the requirements there or the way their business is, they would prefer to be in this category. So that's the choice that's given to financial institutions. There's nothing unusual. It doesn't mean anything regarding the financial stability or any other metrics that you're looking at for these microfinance. The fact that they move from banks to microfinance doesn't change anything to that. It's just a status change, and it is also a change vis-à-vis the requirements vis-à-vis the central bank. But overall, they are still deposit-taking institutions. They're still able to give loans, and I think nothing much has changed in their business apart from these consideration to be called banks. So to answer your question, it just means that we are having fewer banks in the ecosystem. As you said, some merged and some others decided to move to the microfinance sector, but that's it. And what we did is to adjust our metrics and our numbers and say, okay, now this one are going to be considered as microfinance going forward, and that means that there are also changes in the relationship and the different things that we work with them. But otherwise, for the general for their clients, there shouldn't be any big change.
What are the predictions actually when it comes to the economic growth? Still looking at the numbers for the end of the year?
Oh yes, so for end of the year, the original projection at the beginning of this year was 6.6% economic growth. But as I was telling you, only in the first quarter we had 9.7%. So we are going to have an exercise, because this is, as I said, is part of the work we are doing together with the Ministry of Finance. I believe by October we should be done and communicate now our assessment and new projections together. But you can see that we can see that most likely it is going to be exceeded, which is good news. It means that you are planning that you will have a certain level of growth, and the growth is even higher than what you expect. That's the situation we are in now.
Well, Rwanda plans to offer digital currency by 2026. Where are we now?
So on the central bank digital currency, first thing to note is that the project is central bank digital currency. So it's not what people might think typical cryptocurrency. It's a currency that's being backed by the central bank, issued by the central bank. So it's exactly the same as the money that we know, franc rwandais, but in digital form. Right now, there's no decision yet to issue a central bank digital currency. We are at the preliminary phase of this project. And the first phase was to do research. I think it was communicated, saying what are the findings of this research, the advantage that we could have from possibly issuing a CBDC, central bank digital currency. The second phase we are in after this is to go through proof of concept, and then we have a different other steps all the way to, at each stage we need to ensure what we discussed and what we found as main, let's say, advantages of CBDC, plus the way it should be, or the technical requirements, are they doable? That's the phase we are in. Are they doable? Are they really? Are they correct? Are they doable? So when we move from this stage, we go to other stages. So that's a project that is not going to end now, because the central bank decided to take this time to make sure that everything is there, and that also the final consumers of the product, so everyone is aware of what is happening. And at the end of the day, if the central bank decides to issue the CBDC, it would mean that all the other things have been checked, that there will be no issue issuing that. So that's a bit the process, and we are the really preliminary phase of that.
There you have it. Thank you so much for tuning in and being part of this conversation. You're with me, Naringwa Fiona Mothoni. Until next time, stay well.